All right, welcome everybody. This is Steve Grumbine, a president and founder of Real Progress in Action and Real Progressives. And today we've got a great opportunity for you to meet our new host of our new show, the Luke Parcher Show. I'm bringing on this gentleman who interviewed me a couple weeks back. I was so impressed with him. I said, "Hey, why don't you come and join forces with us? Because we really could use a guy like you." And so he said, "Absolutely." And so without further ado, let me bring on Luke Parcher for his first show. How you doing,
Yeah, I'm
sir?
very thrilled to be here, Steve. I was honored when you reached out. I've been a fan of Real Progressives for some time, and as a leftist with an MMT perspective, this felt like an absolutely perfect fit for me. So I'm humbled to be a part of this organization going forward.
Well, we're happy to have you here, man. So let's just talk real quickly about, when we talked, I watched you on Twitter. I watched you debating, talking to people. You were very, very much kind of guy that was willing to talk to people where they are as they are, and you were not willing to take no for an answer. You were very kind. You were gentle. You're the way a lot of the MMT folks like MMT to be talked about. So I figured, hey, if I can't do it, maybe I can bring a guy on that can be gentle, sweet, and kind, and sharp as a tack. And so I'm not disappointed, man. I'm really glad to have you here, buddy.
Well, I very much appreciate that. First of all, you're far too kind. Thank you. But I think that there's among the MMT crowd, it can sometimes get frustrating because I think it was you that said it's actually kind of deceptively simple. And sometimes when people push back on some of these ideas, it becomes very frustrating. Like you're just denying reality, and you go to this kind of frustrated place, right? So I really try to make an effort to meet people where they are as best I can and educate where possible. Sometimes people are just so far gone that they're going to combat you no matter what. But it's I would actually quote the late great Michael Brooks, who was influential in pushing me to start a show. Unfortunately passed away last summer, but he had this great quote where he said, "Be ruthless with systems, be kind to people." And I think that that's a really great way to engage in politics. It's a teaching moment as opposed to an argument. And I think unfortunately on social media, many people take any commentary or critique or objection as this like personal attack. You know what I mean? If I say I disagree with you, what people often hear is you think I'm stupid. And I think there's just a little bit too much reactionary commentary and interactions on social media today. So do my best to try to educate people, and sometimes they prove that they're just too far gone and you walk away. But it's I think MMT is so critical because if I could just talk for a moment about how it radicalized me, actually, I thought I was
Please
mad
do.
about politics before I learned MMT. Right? It's all these sort of upper class donor class folks who get to run our political process, and that's very obvious to most people. But when you learn MMT, you realize that's not so much a mistake or an aspect of mismanagement as it is direct decision making, right? I think a lot of members of Congress must understand this to some degree or another, which means that they are intentionally choosing to allow the struggle to occur, leaving people homeless, leaving people without quality health care, leaving people without access to food, and all these kinds of things. Those are policy choices very directly, and that brings out a certain perspective that I think brings out a healthy anger, I guess you could say. I think it was Stephanie Kelton that said, when the MMT coin drops, you realize the suffering is gratuitous, or something to that effect. And I think that's kind of how it ended up radicalizing me in a sense.
Uh, exactly the case. For me, I've been doing this since, I don't know, about 2009. And, over that period of time, I had the arc of my learning process, which never ends. But I've gotten to the point now where, being around the educators and so forth, I've been able to take their message, translate it as best I can to regular people, such as you and I. But unfortunately, as you get to that arc, you have people that will say, well, show me your credentials, and why should I listen to you? And they have a lot of, without even taking into consideration what you're saying,
Yeah.
they just literally react, just like pounce at you, like you're some enemy. And so this is a very, very difficult world we're in, where you're trying to present life-changing information that can save lives. And people are so jaded and cynical that the very idea that there's an opportunity for us to win, it just is too much for them to fathom. And I certainly understand the history of our country and the history of the way power behaves. So I can certainly understand their skepticism. I share that skepticism. But there is a path, and if we, as activists and voters, and just citizens and people of conscience, gather together and make demands, I think that even the worst oligarchy will listen to us. And but that's my hope. Because short of that, we're left with either revolution or total capitulation.
Yeah, I think that people sometimes assess things in politics in a way where they're kind of looking at individual politicians and actors as opposed to the power structure as a whole. Our influence does not come through particular individuals that we deem moral or immoral, good or bad, but people really like to look at politics in a way where they sort of cast someone into good bucket or bad bucket, and then as they analyze things going forward, they just work backwards from that conclusion, right? And I don't think that that's a productive or healthy way to engage in politics. And oftentimes you get people who will respond viscerally to anything that you say that even by their perception goes against one of the things that they support or like, or someone they support or like. So it's very hard to have nuanced discussions. And when we're talking about these policies, it's important to have those nuanced discussions. And I think MMT does provide this avenue whereby the change that we want is very possible. And for some people, I don't know if it's too scary for them or if it, but you get this kind of pushback when you say, no, we actually can have nice things. You know what I mean? And I would like to look into where that's coming from further, because I think that's one of the biggest hurdles between us and progressive policy is getting people to accept the way the monetary system operates and engage in political discourse with economically accurate language that does not allow our opponents to disingenuously weaponize the whole tax to spend framework. It's a critical aspect of achieving our goals, in my view.
Absolutely. So one of the things that, watching the comments here, and, you know, I don't know. We have a million people out there that identify as real progressives, real progress in action, and have been supporters for years. And, every one of them does their own thing. There's very few people, even in our own direct volunteer team, that we have control over. But we do our best to educate. And, there's times where people get very frustrated when, folks come at you with these things that basically sideline the entire effort of bringing this message forward. And so there's a lot of bad blood, a lot of tough feelings out there for people who are just learning MMT, or maybe have been in different circles that have negative feelings about MMT. They haven't done the studying, they haven't done the research, they haven't done the work. But they feel compelled to say things, even though they don't have any basis from which to say them. And so I guess my question to you is, Luke, given the fact that we can't control anyone, including the naysayers, what is your thought on, taking that Michael Brooks comment further? What would be your approach to presenting information to an unbelieving world?
Well, it might sound repetitive, but I really think that you got to kill them with kindness. And I think when we start to get combative, that very rarely actually brings in a result that we want. If our goal really is to convince people of this, it's going to be a slow process, but we just go as fast as we can and we kill them with kindness is kind of my take on that. It's there does seem to be that strong response to MMT. And what's funny is often when people are pushing back on what someone like you or I is saying on Twitter or any of the other real progressive members, it's often this thing where they kind of agree with exactly what we're saying but continue to push back. Like, well, yeah, obviously that's how the dollar works, but here's some incoherent stuff. You know what I mean? So it almost seems like the argument is not even coming from an academic or substantive place. It's coming from more an emotional response. And I think we need to take that into account when we attempt to combat it. You know what I mean? Like what is the actual thing that's causing you to push back against this education? And I think for a lot of people, it comes off perhaps elitist or snobby to tell people this is how it works. And I think people maybe are taking, like, everyone has to learn everything at some point, right? You don't know 2 + 2 is 4 until someone teaches it to you. So there's no shame in not knowing something. There's actually quite a bit of, to me, it's like admirable to grow and to be open to growth. And I think people sometimes react the exact opposite when you try to engage in these conversations. They take you as lecturing them or talking. I don't mean you personally. I mean, any of us take us as lecturing or talking down to them. And it's really quite the opposite. We're trying to inform people and trying to, create a populace that has a better understanding of how the monetary system operates.
It's funny you say that. Yesterday we released our 121st episode of Macro and Cheese with Professor Steve Keen. And it had a funny title because we're trying to get people to listen to it, right? Because let's be fair, there's a million pieces of social media out there. There's a ton of these alt media streams and podcasts. And for someone to dedicate themselves to listening for a half hour, much less an hour, which is one of our staples of our podcast, they're long form, intentionally lengthy podcasts to teach people the subject matter. We named it What Marx Got Wrong. And obviously he got a lot right? But there's some things that Professor Steve Keen had identified going back to 1974, where he was doing his studies, and he's read literally everything. So we titled it What Marx Got Wrong. Mm-hmm. And point after point after point, I got pushback from people that were talking about somehow or another, just saying horrific things about us, that we had done some evil thing about Marx. I was like, well, tell me, what was your thoughts about the podcast? Did you get a chance to hear it? What did you think about it? Did you read the transcripts? They're right there for your benefit. And no, I didn't do that, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, why did you take the time to slag and take a negative comment there, right? And so when people are when they're blocking, when they're not willing to listen, when they've got a religious mentality about defending politicians or economists that they know and love, and they haven't earned the real knowledge that it takes to push back. There's a lot of frustration coming from activists too, people that do know the stuff, that are trying desperately to share the stuff. How would you overcome people that truly don't even bother reading or listening to the podcasts and so forth, but have things to say? How would you deal with that?
That is a very, very tough question. I think, it's the similarity that I think of is how Twitter does, with the article shares. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, where it comes up and says, you haven't read this article. And it's like, well, sometimes I read it somewhere else. And then I saw that they posted it on, but I think a lot of people read a headline and then base their entire judgment of the article on that headline. I think a lot of people do that on YouTube too. They see a thumbnail or a title, and then they base their entire judgment of the content based upon the sort of the cover, if you will. And it comes back to the fact that we can't engage in nuanced discussions with everybody. It's like there's this crowd that just totally refuses to have any in-depth conversation. They take a surface level, good, bad position, right? A polarized position, and then they work backwards from that conclusion. So if you like Marx, you can't stand any criticism of him, which I think is just utterly ridiculous. Why can't we criticize people that we like? It's I think that's actually a very important aspect of engaging in academics and in politics in a healthy way. When I volunteered for the Bernie campaign in a number of states. I was very critical of Bernie on a number of things as I was volunteering for Bernie. Like, what I just don't get why people can't engage in politics in a slightly nuanced way.
It's interesting that you say that, because as I look at our volunteer base, even in our own volunteer base, the idea of each one teach one and weaponizing knowledge, it's not always easy. We have a lot of folks that, God love them, they're working hard, but maybe they don't pay as much attention to the reading and so forth. And so as they go out to be ambassadors, they're ill-equipped. They're struggling to find their own feet, and they're out there presenting information that they haven't necessarily fully digested, fully, vetted in their own minds. And then they come out there and then they get frustrated because they don't have the answer to the negative pushback. Okay. So they haven't earned the knowledge, so to speak. I was talking yesterday to a friend and I said, back when I used to work out, one of the things that I did that was really stupid was I went in there because I'm a big guy, and I put 300 pounds on the bench press. Now I could do 300 pounds. It wasn't an issue of whether I could do it or not. The issue was, could I do it safely? Had I earned the weight? And my joints and my shoulders really paid the price. It really kicked off some major problems in terms of stability in my body and everything. And the trainer came to me and says, Steve, it's better to do 225 and earn the weight. Earn the weight. Practice. Keep doing it. And I missed a month of working out. When I came back, the very people that were down there at 225 were suddenly up there at 300 because they had earned the weight. And I think it's the same thing with MMT. You got to earn the knowledge. You got to earn that spot. It doesn't mean that you have to have credentials. It just means you have to put the sweat in. And you can't borrow someone else's knowledge, if you will, and claim it for your own and just throw it out there. You have to actually take the time. And this is so important because, and I'll break this down for you and I'll get your take on it. I guess it was about 4 years ago, the IPCC came out and said, we have 11 years to deal with climate change. Well, if that's the case, we got 7 years left. And I guess it's probably even less before we start seeing major impacts based on climate crisis, climate disaster. We're going to start seeing climate refugees. And imagine in Pakistan, where you got Hindis and India, and you've got Muslims here and the natural enemies. And all of a sudden, as arid conditions and you start having migrants go, wow, all of a sudden we're going to start having water wars and we're going to have, wars based on climate. We have got to mitigate this. We've got to build the structures to support us, to help us survive while we try our best to turn back the clock. And physics doesn't negotiate. So MMT is a very, very important understanding to allow us to have the lens by which to fight back to save ourselves from extinction. So with that, when you see people push back and you realize that our very lives are in the balance as they push back, tell me, how do you earn that knowledge? How do you get to a point where you not only can present things in a way where you're giving them an answer to all the naysaying and the pushback, while simultaneously, how would you build that relationship so that you can be effective in that space?
So for me personally, I am a bit of an economics nerd, so it's a little bit easy in the sense that I actually enjoy studying this stuff and building up my knowledge base. But I do think for a lot of people, unfortunately, economics is kind of boring and dry, and I understand that, right? So I think the trick is to somehow get people to understand what an important aspect this is of the political priorities that they have. So, when people talk about climate change or Medicare for all or a Green New Deal or a jobs guarantee or these kinds of things, if they're invested in that policy priority, if we can connect the MMT lens to here's how you can actually successfully achieve that priority is by using accurate language as you're making your points. We can, I think it was Jabari from Real Progressives who tweeted the other day something to the effect of MMT takes the discussion from economics to the actual morals of the policy. Right. So this is a bridge for us to get to the policies that we all desperately need in the climate case to survive. Right. Like our planet will not be here for future generations if we do not take action, or will not be, habitable for future generations if we do not take action. So the moral of the policy becomes the discussion. And if we can somehow get people to understand that having at least a surface level understanding of how the monetary system operates and an understanding of how to engage in these conversations, they may be more invested in actually learning a little bit of this or being open-minded to that. And I would say the second point is to what you were talking about earlier. I think there's a serious problem where people don't think it's okay to say, I don't know. And, I want to make really clear, I'm not an economist. I'm a student, but I can talk MMT on a certain level. I also have no problem admitting when someone gets deep into bank functions or something rather, I don't know, that's something I need to learn. I'm going to go research that, whatever it might be. I think there's this unwillingness to admit that's not my expertise. I'm going to go look into that. And if people were more willing to do that, the discourse about MMT might be more healthy. So I don't know how we can get people to cross that bridge other than by connecting it to the social and political issues that they're prioritizing. But I think that is a very natural connection, and that should potentially be one of the priorities in terms of how we market this to people, or form our narratives.
One of the things that jumps out at me is, much of what we do, you've got the academics in the ivory tower that are speaking in terms like reify and, praxis and things that people are like, huh? And then you have us who are trying to translate from them to them. And sometimes we don't get the right mark for how basic we need to speak. And, it's a sign of knowledge when you can break something down at the most basic level, right? When
Mm-hmm.
you can take this hoity toity, hoi polloi type language and break it down into simple analogies and simple descriptions that allow people that are otherwise busy in life, have very little time to invest in learning this stuff, and maybe don't have the aptitude, maybe have never taken a single economics course and still think the federal government should be run like their household budget. I think that it's incumbent upon us to find ways to do that. But the flip side to that is that a lot of the pushback we have when we do break it down, we got people saying, "Oh, you oversimplified that. That's not exactly correct." And then you've got people on the other side saying, "Well, I don't like the music in your podcast. It's too heavy," or "I don't like this," or you're talking to the converted, you're already speaking to them. How would you go about finding that right balance for presenting to your audience? How do you know your audience? How do you know who you're talking to? And how do you present things at a level by which you can establish that common, ground so that you can make your points?
That is, again, a very good and difficult question. I think I almost would tend to lean towards the idea that some people just, like, everyone might need to hear it a slightly different way. And not that that's a great answer for the prospect of spreading messages, in the sense that we might need a whole lot of voices. But like, for me, I digested quite a bit of MMT in a number of different platforms, or mediums, if you will, reading, YouTube, this kind of thing, before it clicked. And for me personally, it was Randall Ray in a lecture he was giving, where I kind of had this aha moment, you know what I mean? But I think everyone kind of has to hear it just a little bit differently. And to the point you were making about how, like, people will critique us for not being in depth enough, and then also critique us for being too simple. I've seen some people come out and like talk about some of the primers, like Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth, and basically complain, well, this doesn't go into enough detail. And it's like, well, the point of the book is to reach a general audience, you know what I mean? So that's a constant battle that I think we're going to have to engage in, where bad faith critics will take whatever side allows them to criticize us in the moment. And I think we just have to keep on chugging on. But I do think that we need a variety of voices who can explain this in a variety of ways. And for everyone, it might just click when they hear it a slightly different way. Like I said, for me, I digested hours of this stuff, and I grasped parts of it. And then all of a sudden, like, Randall Ray did the history of money lecture, and all of a sudden, and he was talking about sectoral balances. And I had this kind of moment where some preconceived notion that I was holding on to disappeared, and all of it kind of lined up. And, so I think for everyone, it just has to be said slightly differently.
So I tell you what, I'm going to put you on the spot. And I admit right now, this is the spotlight on Luke Parcher, right? Lucky Luke Robitaille.
Thank you,
What
Luke.
I want you to do is give your best, just brief synopsis of what modern monetary theory is.
Oh boy. Yeah, that is on the spot. Um,
Sure is.
oh boy, that's on the spot. So for me, so first of all, what a dollar is, right? It's an IOU, it's a tax credit. The tax is there to drive and maintain demand for the currency, which allows the government to provision itself, makes its currency desired, makes people want to get the currency, creates demand for the currency. And then for me, the part that is really important for people to understand is the sectoral balance discussion about how we fearmonger about debts and deficits in an irrational way. So that is just plain not based in reality. There's nothing about that based in reality. I like the way Warren Mosler puts it. If you're going to claim that X spending is inflationary, the onus is on you to prove that. You do not get to transfer the burden of proof to us to say otherwise, right? So for me, modern monetary theory boils down to understanding that a dollar or a currency of any type is a social construct. It represents what it can purchase, which is labor or goods or services, and the key thing for people to understand is that it's not finite, and governments have the ability to spend. They are not a household, they are not a business, they are not a city, they are not a state. So the key thing is to take the sort of stigma away from deficit spending and make it an acceptable argument in the political arena to say, no, actually I think we should increase the deficit to fund X or Y program.
So what I'm going to do here real quick, Luke, is I'm going to share something with our audience. I think that this is something that everybody should read. Now, I will tell you before I do this gentleman that writes this blog, his name is Roger Malcolm Mitchell. And Roger is not an MMT guy per se. He is adjacent to MMT. But one thing he gets oh so correct is this basic understanding of monetary sovereignty. And his write-up on this is incredibly easy to understand. And so from a perspective of just basics, I want to share this with you and our audience. So give me 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share this. And I hope ultimately that the folks really find this to be as exciting as I found it when the first time I saw this. So, Roger Malcolm Mitchell, again, like I said, he is not a true MMT guy, but he is a guy who I feel presents this thing so simply that it's almost impossible to screw up. And he says, only two things keep people in chains: the ignorance of the oppressed and the treachery of their leaders. And then he says, goes into this quote from Ben Bernanke. The U.S. government has a technology called a printing press, or today, and its electronic equivalent, that allows it to produce as many U.S. dollars as it wishes at essentially no cost. And this is where it really gets particularly interesting to me. He said, perhaps no words more accurately and succinctly illustrate the confusion about economics than monetary sovereignty. It is not a theory or a hypothesis or a philosophy. It is, in essence, it is merely a description of the way federal financing actually works. A monetarily sovereign government has the exclusive and unlimited power to create its sovereign currency. Monetary sovereignty is the foundation of economics. The United States is monetarily sovereign. It has the exclusively unlimited power to create the dollar. China, Canada, Australia, the UK, Japan are monetarily sovereign. They have the exclusively unlimited power to create their sovereign currencies. The U.S. government created the very first dollar from thin air by creating from thin air all the laws and rules that made the dollar possible. Being sovereign over the dollar, the U.S. can do anything it wishes with the dollar. It can make the dollar equal to 3 euros, 2 pumpkins, or 1 partridge in a pear tree. The federal government's sovereignty over the dollar is unlimited. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip past this exchange with Greenspan and all this stuff. It's really, they're good, and you can look at this if you feel like it at some other time. But I want to read this. It says, Illinois, Cook County, and Chicago are monetarily non-sovereign. The dollar is not their sovereign currency, and they do not have the unlimited power to create dollars. So if you think about this, and this is very important, you see a lot of folks out there pushing for state-based Medicare, state-based programs, and they don't understand that the states cannot create currency like the federal government. And so this is really very important. It says France, Germany, and Italy, it should say, and Greece are non-monetarily sovereign. They do not have the exclusively unlimited power to create their currency. They use the euro, and that power is owned by the European Union. You, your business, and I are also monetarily non-sovereign. Even Bill Gates and Warren Buffett do not have the unlimited power to create dollars. They are monetarily non-sovereign because our monetarily sovereign nation has the unlimited power to create its sovereign currency. It never needs to ask anyone for dollars. It doesn't need to tax or borrow, and it can never be forced into insolvency. It can pay any dollar-denominated invoice, any size, any time. In fact, this is the most important part right here. I want to say this clearly. In fact, the federal government creates money by paying its bills. The U.S. has created many trillions of dollars simply by pressing computer keys, and it will continue to do so. It does not owe anyone for creating these dollars, and it cannot live beyond its means, on and on and on. So, folks, I will put this link into the show notes. But this is the kind of stuff that, if you understand it, it fundamentally changes your politics. It's almost impossible to stay stuck. So with that, Luke, I want to ask you one thing. Based on what you just read, is there anything that the United States government can't do, provided we have the real resources and the votes to do it?
No. Simple. If we have the real resources, we can afford it. There is no financial constraint on the United States or any other monetarily sovereign state. That's just, and that's even, like you said, he's MMT adjacent. You don't even have to be MMT to understand that aspect. That's, that is so simple and widely accepted. And this, again, to go back to our earlier point, I've been in discussions before where it's like, people will acknowledge, oh, that's really widely accepted. That's a mainstream position to acknowledge our monetary sovereignty, while they're still pushing back against the very concept that we can afford to do these programs. So and I think it's also worth noting that people will jump to, if a lot of times when I can get through that barrier and people accept that, people will then jump to this. They've been successfully propagandized about inflation and what it actually means, or how prominent it actually is. I would point to, I think it was Fadl Kaboub that said on the Macro and Cheese podcast a while back, the Fed has admitted they have no actual theory of inflation, no valid theory of inflation. So it's just a significantly more complicated issue than people want to give it credit, in the sense that they will jump straight to this inflation fear mongering if they accept that we're monetarily sovereign. So I think it is important to understand that piece that what's his name, Roger was writing there. But then there's the next layer where people will start to find other problems with spending on these programs, and we have to be able to combat that in an economically literate and accurate way. So, but it is good to see that it's becoming more mainstream to acknowledge that there is no financial constraint on government spending. And just very quickly, you mentioned the Medicare for All statewide thing. I view that as a poison pill. I think that's actually a very destructive idea. And a lot of good faith progressives are engaging in this, where they think that like, let me take a step back. You can compare it to like pot legalization. That's a very different thing. That does not involve monetary systems in the way that Medicare for All does. That does not have a macroeconomic effect in the way that Medicare for All does. So you can legalize pot in 5 states, and then people see it goes well, and then the nation follows suit. That's a totally valid way to try to implement that policy. When it comes to something like Medicare for All, it needs to be done at the federal level because we have the power of the purse. And a secondary discussion about Medicare for All, people seem to think we would need to raise taxes for Medicare for All. I again think it's going to be a very difficult battle to win, to explain to people that Medicare for All will be deflationary, and therefore we actually need to increase the deficit if we want to implement it in a responsible way. So there's a number of things that MMT brings up that might on a surface level sort of combat some progressives' analysis and force them to kind of reconsider how they're looking at things. And that can be the hurdle that we get to once we're past the monetary sovereignty question.
So what I'm going to do as a final thing before we break out of here is I want to bring the godfather of MMT into this picture momentarily, Warren Mosler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen once again, and hopefully folks will enjoy this. If they haven't heard it before, this will be a very good opportunity for them to, in fact, hear this. It is an interview I did with Warren Mosler several years back. And quite frankly, it's really powerful. So hopefully everybody enjoys this moment here.
Now, the other thing I want to say about Medicare for All, which we tried to get through to Bernie Sanders, but with success, obviously, is I see it as a highly deflationary event. So right now I see, I'll just use very, very round numbers, but $3 trillion spent on healthcare.
Oh, that's weird. I wonder what happened.
Out of that, $1 trillion in the private sector is private sector administration. That's pretty much going to go away if we go Medicare for all. But what does that mean if that spending goes away? Well,
okay. Well, I'm going to stop this right now.
It was a good effort.
It was a good effort, yeah, but it seems to be being a pain in the butt.
But no, he's exactly right. It's going to be deflationary. It's going to make the system more efficient. It's going to eliminate jobs in the private healthcare sector. And as much as I cannot stand Aetna or Premera, the people who work for them deserve to have a job. So like we would have to increase the deficit and create jobs somewhere else. A lot of them might be able to transition very naturally into administration in the Medicare for All system, but because it's more efficient, it's going to cost jobs. So he's exactly right. I'm sure that I'm getting my analysis from Warren, to be totally frank, but yeah, that's my view, and I think that's an issue that might be particularly hard to convince progressives of, because they have a very, in my opinion, like admirable desire to tax the rich. I want to tax the rich too. It's just not to pay for things, and it shouldn't be done in an instance where we're seeing deflation. If you want to tax the rich more, then transfer some of the taxes that are hitting lower class people up to the rich, fine. But if you're talking about increasing taxes on a macro level as you're implementing a deflationary policy, that's just generally bad practice, right? So it just, seems to me like it's a pretty obvious thing that's going to be hard to like you often, it's deceptively simple, you know what I mean? And I think sometimes if these things combat with someone's natural political instincts, it's very difficult to get them to accept something.
Absolutely. So real quick, I want to tell everybody, first of all, I'm so glad we have Luke on. We're getting ready to close out, but this Wednesday night we have our national outreach call. We have one every month. And this week's or month's national outreach call, we'll have Jen Perlman joining us. It's really a great opportunity, not only to get to know all the volunteers at Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, but to, participate and become a part of this thing. We are a volunteer driven organization, and we are activists. We are not professionals, although we're hoping to get more and more pro'd up as we go. And we survive on your contributions, and not just monetarily, although we do. And by the way, on Real Progressives, it's a 501c3. So any donations there are tax deductible. So don't be afraid. We need you. But Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or daylight time, as it were, please join us for our national outreach call with Jen Perlman. And have a great time, get to know some people, and find out if there's a place for you to help, because there is. We need you. So, Luke, thank you so much. This is your show, so I'm going to let you take us out, brother.
Well, thank you so much for introducing me, Steve, and I am very much looking forward to continuing to put out content on a regular basis. For those who haven't followed my work thus far, I do a lot of political commentary from that MMT lens, some leftist commentary, and I really try to stick to systemic causes of problems and not get lost in the sort of political theater weeds, if you will. So I'll be doing, hopefully a whole variation of things on this platform, some interviews and live streams and pre-recorded videos on certain topics and all sorts of things. And I really look forward to continuing to engage with you guys and this audience.
Fantastic. It's great to have you here, sir. Thank you, folks, for sticking with us. Luke is going to be with us for the foreseeable future. I'm so excited about it. And with that, we're out of here.